Hey YouTube, Gordon Miller here. Okay, so this is another one of my mentors in my mentor series, and I'm trying to go in chronological order. Hopefully, I don't forget anybody. Um, so I'm at the point where I'm in graduate school, and so that makes my next mentor Ron Daniel. So Ron is, or Ron was, the fifth year undergraduate studio head at the time at Virginia Tech in the College of Architecture. And I did my graduate research assistantship with Ron. And he got the task of educating all of the 18-year-olds that came into the program thinking they wanted to become an architect. And it was a great, great overall program. I mean, I learned a lot because the graduate program didn't really focus on some of the things that the undergraduates did. And in many ways, I think the undergraduate program was better than the graduate program. I think I learned a lot from the undergraduate program. But I got to work with a lot of the younger kids who wanted to come in, and I mean, I was 24 at the time or something like that, and so it was one of those kind of things where, I mean, they were 18, and I had a better idea about what I wanted to do and a more complex understanding of the process and things like that. So Ron was an amazing guy. Has graduated from Harvard. Has an amazing design sense. Is an amazing architect in his own right. And but there was really some pivotal things that I learned. Working alongside him in the studios and watching him do what he did to help the students really kind of informed my own process, that when I would graduate from my master's program and then be offered an opportunity to teach at Tech for 5 years, I tried my best to emulate what Ron's classroom style was, because Ron Daniel had this phenomenal, warm, human, compassionate kind of approach to the process. He knew that not all those kids were going to become architects, and some would drop out of the program within the first month or two or three. Some would drop out after the first year. But he knew that helping them through the process, that if the process was too difficult for them, they would give up and not struggle through the process. And he knew that there were good architects in there who would be discouraged by the process, and he didn't want to see that happen. And so, I think that was kind of an interesting way to approach that. I mean, I really do. He didn't want to lose the really good potential students because they couldn't find their way through the process. And I admire and respect that. I really do. And so the other great thing that Ron did was Ron introduced me to the opportunity in your graduate program. You get an opportunity to do an internship, and so I did my internship in Chicago, and with Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and David Child was the senior partner in the New York office, and I believe David also went to Harvard, and so Ron had reached out to David, and I was recommended for the Chicago office. There were a number of opportunities. The Chicago office was, at that time, was working on the 1990 Barcelona Olympics pavilions, and this was 1998 or 1989, and just ahead of the 1990 Olympics. And the studios at Skidmore were organized into groups, about 600 architects, and they were in what was it, like 12 studios, I believe. And so in those 12 studios, there were 3 computer users. So in the basement of 33 West Monroe, SOM had given that floor to IBM, and IBM had set up all the computers that Skidmore was using in order to be able to do the designs. And so there were 3 computer users per studio. There was one super user, which was the power user, and there were 2 junior users. And so I was lucky enough to become one of the junior users. So there was only 36 of us in the entire organization, responsible for the work of 600 architects. And it was really an amazing experience. It was really one of the most relevant and incredible experiences of my life. And dealing with working in a large company, I got paid a decent amount of money at the time. And I lived in Chicago, which I loved. I lived in Hyde Park in South Chicago. So I took the train from South Chicago, 58th Street, and all the way up to the Loop. It took the Grant Park station and, walked on over to 33 West Monroe. And I loved my time there. It was great. And SOM was a great company to work for. And I love those guys. And it was one of those kind of things where I really appreciated Ron putting in the request, as a favor. And because I was like, okay, so what do I have to do to interview, or what do I have to do? Where do I go? What do I have to put a portfolio together? And Ron was like, no, you've got the job. Just show up in Chicago. And I'm like, really? Wow. Okay, great. So, I had started working when I was 10 years old in my father's gas station, the first one he had. And then by the time I was 14, I was opening on Sundays, and making money. And then when my father started Atlantic Marketing, I was working 60 hours a week in that capacity. And so then I get this great opportunity to work at Skidmore, one of the finest architecture firms in the country. And I owe that to Ron. I mean, I really do appreciate it. In fact, oddly enough, so I've never had to interview for a job ever, which is kind of funny. But my next one of my next mentors is going to be Wayne Clough, who is Dean of Engineering, and so Wayne saw some opportunities to reward me for the work I'd been doing as a graduate student by making me faculty and administrative faculty and owning my own lab. And so it was funny. I mean, it was, I didn't have to interview for that job either. I mean, they were like, here, we want to do this. We think it would be a great opportunity. We think you're doing some great stuff. We want you to keep it up. And it was funny how that worked. And, anyway, so, and then I started my own companies, and I've never had to actually interview for a job. So I'm 55 and never had a job interview. So anyway, so Ron Daniel was, has been a great friend, enormous, individual. I think I respect his experience at Harvard and the work that he did with the kids and all the stuff he's done over the years. When Charles Steger became president of the university, Charles was the dean of the School of Architecture before he became president of Virginia Tech. And when Charles became the president of Virginia Tech, he took a lot of the architecture faculty out of the architecture school and promoted them to the provost office and other areas like that. And so, a lot of the people that I knew were running the university for a long period of time. And Ron Daniel was in the provost office. He was the director for undergraduate education, worked in the honors program and things like that for the entire university. And later on, he went to become, have a major position in schools in Europe and other places like that. So he's had a tremendous opportunity. And now I understand we went back for the lab tour for my youngest son, who's thinking about going to Virginia Tech for architecture school. And I mentioned Ron's name to one of the faculty members, and he's like, well, Ron's back. So he left his job in London and came back to Virginia Tech to teach. They must have made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So, it's great. I mean, Ron's just a phenomenal person. And, that early work in the studios, I learned so much. It was a real education in and of itself. And then the work that he did in vouching for me and going to bat for me with Skidmore when I worked in Chicago was great. It was a phenomenal experience. I loved it. And Ron was on my thesis committee for my master's thesis, and he was a great inspiration during that process, and I enjoyed it. It was great. It was terrific. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Ron. I love you, and I appreciate all the work that you've done over the years to help guide and support me. And I look forward to another dinner like the one we had the other night, and I look forward to seeing you again here soon in 2020. Thanks, Ron.